Hi, I'm Kimberley Leonard, and this is the Sky News Daily. As the Women's FIFA World Cup kicks off, two of England's biggest stars, Beth Mead and captain Leah Williamson, won't be flying out to Australia and New Zealand with the rest of the team. They're out of action because of ACL injuries, and they're not the only ones. Up to 30 players are expected to miss the tournament due to the same knee injury. England defender Jess Carter was asked about it on her way to the tournament.
We just feel more could be done to support us. Why there's so many injuries? How can we prevent it? The question I sometimes ask is, if this was happening to high-profile men's players, would more work be going in to try and improve things, really?
It's being called an epidemic in the women's game, but what is causing it? We'll hear from Dr. Kate Jackson, a sports and exercise medicine specialist who's worked with athletes in football, netball, and athletics on ACL injuries. But first, our data and forensics correspondent, Tom Cheshire, and producer Maz Poynter have been digging into the data on this. Hello to you both. Thank you so much for chatting to me. Tom, first of all, what exactly is an ACL?
ACL, anterior cruciate ligament. So it's actually a very small band of tissue, but if you break it, if you rupture it, it's pretty devastating. And also for women, you're a lot more likely to break it. So you see more ACL injuries in the men's game just because there are more people playing football at all levels. But in the women's game, you're around 2.5 to 3.5 times more likely to rupture your ACL if you're playing. So that's the sort of central question really, is why is this happening? It was actually prompted by Maz, who sadly suffered an ACL injury and had lots of surgeries. So, I mean, that's where the idea of this came from, really.
Okay. Maz, what happened? You were playing rugby, right?
Yeah, so I was playing rugby. Just played for an amateur team in southwest London, and I wasn't even holding the ball, which a lot of these injuries are actually, they're non-contact. I just tried to turn direction, and I felt it, as many people say who get the injury, they just felt something pop. And I just fell to the ground and was a bit in denial for a while, and then I tried to stand up and realised that I actually couldn't, and my leg just gave way.
You couldn't stand up at all?
Well, the whole point of the ACL, of the ligament, is that it basically attaches your femur to your tibia, to your shin bone, and stops it from kind of sliding forwards. So if that's gone, then there's nothing really to keep it in its structure, and that's what I unfortunately found when I fell to the ground.
You definitely need an ACL if you want to walk.
Okay, we'll carry on with your journey, shall we call it, in a bit. But Tom, we're talking about this, yes, because there are so many players who are going to miss the World Cup, but it's been a problem, increasing in numbers for a while now, hasn't it?
Yeah, and some of the reason for that is it's a good problem because more and more women are playing the sport. So that's always the other side of it too. But in terms of it, we were speaking to one expert and she told us that basically each year one squad, whatever level, will have an ACL injury. And that's at the elite levels. That's also sort of down all the way to grassroots. And basically, it sort of boils down to two categories. It's nature versus nurture. So some of it is nature in terms of, women are shaped differently from men, especially when it comes to the pelvis and things like that. And the biomechanics of it is different. But then there's the nurture side. And a lot of that's around culture and society. So one of the big things you can do to prevent injury is strength and conditioning. That means going to the gym and lifting weights, basically, is what it is. But traditionally, in society, women, especially girls, at a younger age, they've been discouraged from doing it. That's a man's thing to go and lift weights. Where actually it's good for everyone. You're not necessarily going to bulk up, you build strength, and that does prevent injury. Or then other things, football boots, right? They've always been designed for men. It's only in the last few years you've actually had football boots being designed for women. And so we spoke to one researcher. She's going around scanning feet. I think she scanned 350 feet, which is
nice.
One way to
Great
spend
job.
your time.
Yeah.
But it's really useful because you get to understand the differences, in arches, in sort of heel shape and size. And then that actually feeds back because she's been scanning by all sorts of categories, including ethnicity. And actually, that feeds back into the men's game because traditionally those boots were designed for white men. And actually, there's a huge swathe of humanity that's being left out of it. So that can feed back into it.
Tom, you've been speaking to two players who previously had ACL injuries, and they said that they think the conditions that they play in were partly to blame. What did they tell you?
Yeah, I mean, these were just two players, very keen footballers. But this is also something heard from some of the experts we spoke to. And they said, we come second after men. the men get the first go at the training pitch. So when we go on, it's all cut up, it's all muddy, or they'll have to move pitch because it's been booked out because their game is always the sort of second thought. And that changing that surface is something that's very crucial, even at the elite levels. I think one of the things that jumped out, actually speaking to Luke Johnson, the surgeon, he was saying that in some places, there are athletes where it's actually that there is no disparity. And so the example he picked was dancing. So if you think of maybe ballet especially, or other forms of dance, actually they rupture their ACLs at exactly the same rate. Now, some of that is perhaps to do with pitches, in that if you're dancing, you're not changing pitches, all that. But he was saying it's probably more cultural in terms of those athletes are treated the same from day one, and especially because to get really good at that, you're going to have to start at an early age. But when it comes down to sort of male and female athletes or performers who, very, very high performance at the elite level, if they've been doing it from young at the same age, getting the same level of care, that discrepancy seems to disappear. But I don't think anyone would argue that male and female football players are getting the same amount of care at whatever stage of the pyramid you are. So I think that is a big part of why we have that discrepancy.
And Maz, what does it do for someone's career? I mean, it can potentially end their career, can't it?
Oh, certainly. But it's not just elite players either. I mean, this is from grassroots football up to elite players. But what we're finding is that a big majority of people that once they've had the injury won't go back to their sport. And those that do don't get back to the level that they were playing at before.
Probably because it was so traumatic when they experienced it.
Yeah, definitely. And also the kind of level of rehab they've got to do afterwards, it's up to a year.
So with the surgery, what do they do exactly?
So we were lucky enough to go and film some knee surgery.
Lucky enough.
It was.
It sounds traumatic.
I thought it was fascinating.
It was fascinating.
How long was it?
So it was an hour and a half operation. So the idea is that they'll take a graft from your hamstring. They take it out of the knee, cut it out, and then really weirdly, the surgeon kind of sits by the patient. Patient is doing his own thing, just sleeping away. And he gets out his needle kit and he starts...
You have to roll it up. It's a bit like, I don't know, like a sort of sushi roll. So you get the hamstring, you roll it up, you get it like that, and then that's what goes back inside the knee. After a fair bit of drilling and hammering and all that, and the hamstring becomes the new ACL. And that works pretty well. And so it's a pretty well understood procedure. And the difficult bit is not necessarily the surgery, it's the rehab afterwards. Because when you see the sort of the force that they put through that, there's a huge amount of tugging and drilling and all that sort of stuff. That's why you have to have a year of rehab afterwards, and you have to go to the physio like you've been doing. Yeah. It's keyhole surgery, and it makes it sound sort of that's very precise, and it is precise, but there's also a tremendous amount for a knee to get through. It gets pummeled basically, and that's why the rehab's so long.
It's one thing the surgeon said, wasn't it? It's 90 minutes with him, but actually it's a year afterwards where you've got so much work to do with your physiotherapist to try and make sure that the muscles around the joint are as strong as they can be to help you get back to playing sport. And it's a long time, and it's not just the playing necessarily. It's seeing your friends at the club. It's being part of something bigger than just exercise. And I think that's why it can be so devastating.
Okay, this is a good point to bring in Dr. Kate Jackson. Kate, you're a trustee for Power Up to Play and a sports and exercise medicine specialist. And you've worked on ACL injuries in various sports, haven't you?
Yeah, so I saw a lot of ACL injuries through my work as a doctor for the Oxford United Academy. And I saw that side of the impact on young players. I saw how they were out of their sport for a year. I saw how they lost some of their social life that you get through playing team sport. I saw that the rehab is tough, it's long, it lasts a year. And that has a mental side to it as well, a psychological side. So I saw that side of it. And I also became aware that the number of ACL ruptures in that teenage age group was increasing significantly. So those two things combined made us want to bring the power and the benefits of doing a structured injury prevention warm-up to grassroots sport. Because we know it's there at the elite level. And the research has been there for 20 years or more now. But what it hasn't done is quite reached all the grassroots level sport yet. So that's what our charity Power Up to Play is trying to achieve.
Okay, we'll have a chat about that in a moment. But we've been talking to our correspondent, Tom Cheshire. He's been looking at why ACL injuries are so much more common in female athletes. And he was talking about nature versus nurture. In your opinion, do you think it's the way women are treated, girls are treated in the sports, or is it something in their biology that predisposes them to these kind of injuries?
I'm not trying to get out of this question, but I do think it's a mixture. It's multifactorial. There is the aspect of anatomical differences. There may be, we know there is an impact from menstrual cycle, but we don't really fully understand what that is or how we can effectively change it. We do know that there's a modifiable factor around knee control and the mechanics of landing and changing direction. But there is some interest now in the gender aspect of sport for female injuries and whether that slight difference historically in how girls are treated versus boys, not necessarily consciously, but as girls reach their teenage years, I think any mother of a young teenager, female teenager, knows that sometimes sport gets pushed aside a little bit.
Okay, so can you explain just a bit more about how hormones in the menstrual cycle could impact your chances of getting injured?
So there was a really nice meta-analysis, which means a type of research where they gather all of the data together to try and make data a little bit stronger. And that was from 6 years ago. And what they concluded is that hormones appear to have an impact, okay, but the evidence is still weak. And that when they looked at the research being done about interfering with that, overriding it with hormones like the oral contraceptive pill, their conclusion is right now, we don't have enough evidence to say whether that's going to make a difference or not. Now, there is research in this area going on at the moment, and I'm really interested and encouraged by that. And, we'll move with that as the research emerges around this area.
It's interesting because England defender Jess Carter has suggested that if this was going on in the men's game, up to 30 players won't be going to the World Cup because of the same injury. She's suggesting that if it was happening in the men's game, there'd be a lot more being done about it. Is that something you'd agree with?
There's been a lot of talk about the fact is there enough research in female sport? If you go on to PubMed or any of the research databases and put in female ACLs, there is an immense amount of research out there. But I do think there's always room for more. And because it's more complex, because there's a number of factors that affect women that don't affect men, that's probably where we need more money to be driven, because of course research needs funding. So my answer to that is that, more research would be wonderful. But to say there's been none wouldn't be true either.
Talking of research, your work is translating research into practical advice for people. So what is your advice?
So it's so simple. Before you play a sport, do a structured warm-up. This evidence has been out there for 20 years and it's being utilised at the elite level. And we really want to see it happening down at grassroots level, okay? And our charity initiative, Power Up to Play, go have a look at our website because we offer free training. And what it tells you and shows you is how to do a structured warm-up. It needs to have some strengthening work. It needs to have some controlled landing, thinking about your knee position. It needs to have some controlled change direction work. And it needs to have some balance and some plyometric work, which means that bouncy work, just to get the body prepared and ready for the sport you're about to play.
Now, you said that research has been around for 20 years, but do you think now teams and coaches, whether it's at the elite level or grassroots level, they're taking this more seriously now?
Yes. Absolutely. So we are getting more and more interest from coaches all over the UK. And we're getting lots and lots of requests through to the charity asking for more information about this and to find out how to get their coaches trained. We find very encouraging. And ideally, we'd like our charity to become obsolete. We want it to be the point where it's so normal for people to do an injury prevention warm-up that you don't need a charity initiative like Power Up to Play.
Back to that football, the World Cup, 30 players. I know you're not football pundits, but that surely is going to have some sort of an impact on the tournament.
So 25 to 30 players, we think. They're players that have got more than 10 caps for their country. are going to be missing out on the tournament because of this same injury.
Yeah, I mean, and that's the difference, right? I remember growing up and David Beckham's metatarsal looming very large indeed, but those were different sort of injuries. The fact that it's an entire squad's worth
Of the
and
same
same one. So yeah, it's gonna have such an impact, and it's such a shame, obviously, for the players, for the people watching. Because I came back and watched the Euros, and it's such amazing scenes, and two of those players aren't going to be there, going for the biggest prize of them all.
Thanks to Tom, Maz, and Dr. Kate Jackson. That's it for today's Daily, but if you're looking for more, you can scroll back in our feed and find episodes from earlier on in the week, including one where I spoke to our international correspondent John Sparks about his meeting with an Irishman fighting on the front lines in Ukraine.